Welcome to the Brain Coffee Podcast, where doctors Eric Luthard and Albert Kim unlock life's little mysteries about health, wellness, entertainment, technology, and how the brain makes sense of it all. Sit back, relax, and open up your mind.
My kids love Halloween, and again, they love to go out and get. I think for them, they're primarily interested in the candy.
Oh yeah. My kid wants like a garbage bag and go out. Yeah,
totally. But again, it's interesting watching what they get excited about, what they get scared about. And I think about my own childhood. For instance, I remember, I would not go in the basement when I was a little kid. I was convinced there was.
I totally get that. Yeah.
There was boogeyman or ghosts down there, and it's interesting again that this a notion of how when I was very certain that there's something down there that was going to get me.
It's funny. I mean, as we get older, we become adults. We suppress those things.
Right.
Occasionally you still get a thought like that, but then you actively suppress it.
I think we have knowledge now. You know what I mean?
Right.
We have numerous experiences now where I've gone into the basement and I've made it out okay. You know
That's
what I mean?
true. That's true.
But when
you've
you're a
learned,
child,
exactly.
You've learned, right? When you're a child, you don't know so much, right? And so it's uncertain. Do you have any kind of creepy, scary moments in your childhood?
What you talk about is a universal one. We had a dingy basement. Probably there's the occasional rusty nail sticking out somewhere, which is actually really physically dangerous also.
Right.
But yeah, you would think all sorts of things like ghosts or some kind of serial killer under the stairs, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Now here's a question. Have you ever been to Lemp Mansion?
Oh yeah.
So here's a question. Would you spend the night in the basement of Lemp Mansion today?
I like that place, by the way. It was scary. Even though I know, as you said, by experience that nothing's going to happen, I probably wouldn't do it. I probably wouldn't do it.
Right now we are now touching on the intersection of reason and emotion and fear. What if I paid you, I don't know, $100?
Well, I mean,
or what if I made fun of you publicly?
I'd probably do it, but more than anything, like you know very well, it's time more than anything. Right. I'm going to be in Lemp Mansion overnight. That means I can't see my kids for a certain
Okay,
hour.
fair enough.
Right?
Okay, let's say your
maybe
kids
that's just an escape.
Yeah, that's an escape. Let's say your kids are on vacation.
Yeah.
Your wife is working, and you have the entire night free.
Yeah.
And you can either spend your time in the basement at Lemp Mansion with the lights out,
right,
by yourself, or going into a Shark Tank.
Okay, fine. All right, that's easy. So I would be in Lemp Mansion, but you may
Shark Tank with the cage.
Okay. I do the Lemp Mansion, but you may hear a scream or two from me, maybe. I mean, screams are interesting in themselves. I mean,
actually, you know what? That is a good one. Talk more about that.
Yeah. So screams are a very unusual kind of sound, is what people have discovered. It has some odd variability in the frequency. They call it something like roughness or some acoustic sort of property it has, and for whatever reason, that sound can activate our amygdalas more so than other sounds. It's kind of crazy.
Your amygdala is really dialed in to hearing that sound of a scream.
Exactly. So you hear a scream from somewhere, you automatically feel fear as well. I mean, it's probably, again, an evolutionary thing that
But another
saved us.
example of that is babies crying. And actually, people have used this as torture, actually, where basically they play audio recordings of babies crying because there's this innate kind of, uneasiness that it elicits when you hear a baby cry.
No, that's probably right. It probably does activate the amygdalas also. I mean, when we're parents and I don't know, maybe the kid is in danger or is really hungry, starts screaming, you should hear that. You got to take care of that, right?
It immediately turns on. You know what I mean? It turns this anxiety.
Exactly.
Speaking of, right?
Yeah, screams are very interesting. So they're studying that specific sound more so. Apparently, in some labs,
Didn't you tell me that that scream sound, that roughness of sound, is similar to the audio signatures of alarm clocks?
Oh yeah, that's what they also found out in this study. That same roughness quality is in alarm clock sounds, and that's probably what gets you up in the morning.
Right,
yeah, exactly.
So if it was some gentle massaging, sound. That's why sometimes when you have my iPhone alarm is this gentle kind of mystic, Tibetan gong sound.
Oh yeah.
I can slowly sleep through that.
Yeah, that doesn't work. It's gonna be
Right, exactly. Getting back to Halloween for a moment, I think one of the interesting things is what are the monsters that scare us? And in many ways, I was reading an interesting article, why do people like zombies so much right now?
Yeah, I like zombie movies. Yeah. How about yourself too?
No, zombie movies are good.
Yeah.
And if you look through history, like which monsters got created through each epoch, like you had whether it be Dracula or Frankenstein or zombies, people talk about that being a collective response to social anxieties. So, for instance, why people responded so strongly to Frankenstein was that it really embodied people's anxiety about emerging technology and its interface with society and
that's
morals,
interesting.
right? And people were really scared about the emergence of technology at that time, and that really embodied. And people talk about zombies. And interestingly, is that this notion of kind of these lifeless hordes, taking over societies is, in some senses, a psychological representation of people's collective loss of social control.
Right.
Meaning that we're being overtaken by whatever it is.
Exactly. You lose your individuality.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
That sense.
And you get taken over, your brain gets eaten, and then you get, you yourself become a zombie. Mm-hmm. I think in some senses the monsters really represent our collective anxiety and fears about society at that time.
I think that's probably true. Although it's interesting, so what would be the monster for our times now? It's interesting to think about that.
Well, certainly zombies are part of it, right? That's why
Yeah.
I think zombies are so popular. But the real question is, what is there a new Frankenstein that's approaching?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a lot of movies about social media and their logical absurdities.
Mm-hmm. I think the AIs, are increasingly becoming
that's a good one too.
Like Terminator, so often Terminator is referenced when people talk about their anxieties to AI, like Skynet taking over. Basically, this entity that's smarter than us, stronger than us, that subjugates us, right?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, it's kind of like a variation of the zombie theme.
That's right. But the zombies aren't smart, they're uncontrollable forces that where we lose ourselves in. The AIs, or the Terminators, are something that's smarter, stronger, that's coming our way, that's superior to us, that makes us inferior and a slave.
Exactly.
And the Matrix is another example of that?
Right. So we're actually not in this world, but we're in a different world.
Yeah.
Subdued,
right?
In a cocoon, exactly.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so here's an interesting kind of thing that, again, we've been talking about all these, ghosts, goblins, the Blair Witch Project, The Exorcist, things that are scary. And, for instance, certainly, if you watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's scary, and you see kind of people getting hurt and injured, with chainsaws. But, the honest truth is, thinking about this in a different context, we as neurosurgeons, especially dealing with trauma, we see some pretty terrible stuff.
No, you're right.
But at the same time, it doesn't scare us. Right.
That's interesting. So we have the context of many things that could be potentially scary or fear-inducing, exactly. And yet we do not feel that. You're right. I mean, that's probably the last on my head when I'm doing those cases.
Right. Like, so, and I remember, I have this distinct memory once of, a guy was changing a tire on a semi, and the tire exploded, and it caused the whatever tool he was using to literally just literally almost cut his head in half.
Right,
and I remember he came in and again quite literally his brain is exposed, but it was just kind of part of what we did,
exactly.
And I remember a med student was just ghost white next to me, right? And again, we took him to the OR, we got him fixed up, put his skull and scalp back together, and that was kind of a part of day in the life. It was part of work, and I guess some of it is just getting experience.
No, I agree. It really depends on the context. I mean, when I first saw blood, I did pass out. I mean, this is decades ago now, but now it happens every day, and I don't feel like it's fear-inducing at all. But you're right. You do learn that over time.
I think at this juncture, that experience of getting exposure to these, otherwise, horrific things, doesn't cause your amygdala to kind of go crazy anymore. And I'm sure, for instance, soldiers have that same experience when they're going through kind of wartime efforts, where basically they're probably seeing a lot of terrible things, it's not affecting them anymore. And I think actually specifically. One of the training strategies for Navy SEALs is for them to learn life-threatening experiences, meaning they put them underwater until they lose consciousness. They push them to absolute extreme limits where they fail. That they train them to separate the psychology of the danger from their actions. And so, I think that there's some level of emotional separation and amygdala suppression that happens.
Yeah, and they have to learn that. Yeah, I agree with that. But I was just thinking, I'm just thinking about our case. But even in our case, it's not completely that it's learned. We still, for instance, need to focus on the job by isolating an area. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're covering up the parts of a patient's face and body and focusing on the area at hand only.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
I bet you that's probably useful. I mean,
Like, for instance, if you had to, it's kind of strange thought experiment, if you were operating on somebody's brain and you had to, like, somehow, like, be face to face with them.
That does happen sometimes, but we try to avoid that. I think intentionally, because that probably just subconsciously activates those systems, like the amygdala systems we've been talking about.
Where you were less logical and rational.
Yeah, right.
And it's interesting. Although the interesting thing is, while yes, I think we have to suppress our fear response, at the same time, I think you're also actually trained to be empathetic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like,
there's some conflict there. No, you're right.
And,
you're right.
and so you really have to. It's kind of a fine tuning your system so that you don't get scared, but at the same time, you actually have to really promote your ability to empathize both with the patient and their family.
No, that's right. And you have to be thinking. I mean, not everything has the same solution, right? So you're thinking, what would the solution for this person in front of you be?
Right. That's
so you're
exactly
thinking
right.
On their behalf, almost.
Right. That's exactly right. Because you have to, kind of what we call theory of mind. Put yourself in their shoes to think about kind of what they want. Because different people have different priorities through a given surgery and what they want their outcomes to be.
Right. All right. Speaking of some scary stuff, you want to put metal into people's heads, right? Brain-computer interfaces and things like that?
Certainly to kind of restore neurologic functions like stroke and spinal cord injury, absolutely.
So tell me more about that. You think, it's Halloween. You think...
push it to the extreme?
Right. Might be some BCI or brain-computer interfaces out there that might, suppress fear in situations where we don't want it, for instance.
I mean, theoretically, one could imagine a situation where, let's say that you wanted to create the absolute fearless soldier, right? That we put it in deep brain stimulators all the time to either amplify or inhibit a given region of brain. So, for instance, in Parkinson's disease, we put a stimulator in the substantia nigra to kind of suppress it so that neural circuit is readjusted so that people have better motor functioning, right? So, I mean, could one contemplate, putting a stimulator in the amygdala and inhibiting its action so that, maybe you wanted to send somebody into some really scary stuff, and you could turn their fear off. I mean, it's
total science fiction. I understand.
It's science fiction, and I wouldn't advocate for it.
Yeah,
but at least it's theoretically possible.
I mean, just to think about this a little more. I mean, maybe.
So you're going to really push me to talking about the crazy stuff, right?
No. I was thinking. I mean, one would think, at least based on first principles, that it's good to shut down your fear in those life-threatening situations. But maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want that system to be activated, at least in some part. You want the blood to be going to your muscles. Yeah. You want your heart rate to be racing so you can run as fast as you can or fight as hard as you can.
Here's where it would be beneficial. That could help people with PTSD.
That's true.
So for instance, let's say kind of a real-world example is let's say you have these stimulators in the amygdala, and they're wearing Google glasses, and every time it sees kind of their triggers, it turns off their amygdala, so they don't get that fear response.
That's possible, and then you could learn to suppress your amygdala, which is actually suppression of the fear response is as important as learning the fear response to something, for sure.
That's exactly right. And hopefully with time, the plasticity would cause it to kind of downregulate. But as you were pushing before, you could make super turbocharged, kind of like fearless, soldiers.
Yeah, right. We could make other fixes in them as well. Maybe increase short-term memory and other things like that. I mean, if we're talking about super soldiers, but back to fear and scary stuff.
All right, another scary thing. Did you ever go camping and tell campfire stories?
Oh yeah, went to a camp in Massachusetts for 2 months. In the
2
forest.
months. Oh wow.
Yeah, when I was about 12. Yeah, and lots of scary ghost stories.
Now, why would we do that?
That's a funny thing. I mean, that was a time of Friday the 13th, Jason and Mike Myers and things like that.
Which is especially scary. I mean, my God.
Right. We're in a camp. We're teenagers. It's like a Jason-like scenario. Right. And then we're telling scary stories. Why would we do that? You're right. That's absolutely nuts, actually, if I think about it. But it was fun, right?
Right. But maybe it gets at that thrill of being scared.
Right.
Where maybe some of it is also to kind of train us to handle our fear. We're drawn towards kind of this quote unquote exposure therapy where we try to scare ourselves, but we can draw ourselves back and we learn that it's okay.
No,
maybe it's part of learning when we grow up.
No, I think you might be right, because I mean, this is true for old German folk tales as well. I mean, you're part German, right?
Right, yeah.
I mean, there's some scary Grimm story tales. I mean, the Brothers Grimm story tales. I mean, we've sort of Disneyfied and made all these stories a lot lighter, but I mean, like Cinderella, if I remember correctly, the stepmom wanted to shove her stepdaughter's feet into the glass slipper.
Right.
So they like cut the heel off or cut the toes off. There's fear-inducing stories that are lessons for life,
to make kids remember, right?
Yeah, to learn.
Well,
I think you're right.
I just remember, like, some of these, German kid stories. Very often, the kids ended up getting chopped up and made into cookies. Like, that was like a common ending. You know what I mean?
In the soup kettle or in the oven.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and so I think we've definitely softened with time, but but I think there is something to the, again, with, fear, the amygdala being connected to the hippocampus and really, forcing learning that, and certainly from a training standpoint, when we were neurosurgeons as residents, those moments when, for instance, like your faculty member yelled at you for making a mistake, you never forget those, right?
No, you're right. In training, I absolutely remember those times. I appreciate them, actually.
Absolutely. And I think as a kid, whether it's at the campfire and we learn these stories to scare ourselves and to know and actually come through it, so that we have a certain maybe fear resilience. Like
you're right. I think there's some grit involved.
There's a kid play aspect to learning how to deal with their fear, and they tell themselves campfire stories, right?
I think there's something to that. I think you're right. Just to an extent, right?
To an extent, that's right.
I mean, you don't want to make them scared every time, and then so your sympathetic nervous system is pumping, pounding.
Right. Well, then they
every
get
time you see
PTSD,
something.
right?
Right, exactly. But I think you're right. You probably develop some resilience by listening to those stories. I mean, I don't know. Well, I mean, one can argue the utility of being scared of the man with the wooden leg. I mean, I don't know about that. Do you remember that story?
Right,
I mean, your buddy would just yell the man with the wooden leg at the end of it.
Right.
But I can see the learning from the fear responses.
But, again, that it's in the context of this social thing. It's fun. You get scared, you get better. Again, like kids play out scenarios to learn social dynamics and to kind of and to grow. And people talk about today that unstructured play is one of the most important things for kids to develop.
No,
right?
You're right. Kids should be allowed to play. I agree because it's
and this is a form of play, that allows them to deal with fearful topics.
Right. There's fear. I mean, other times they're in a playground playing together, cooperation. No, you're right. This is absolutely important.
So it's a really interesting thing.